Talking Trees with Lily and Jad. Welcome to Talking Trees. It's Saturday, and that means we're dedicating today's episode to exploring trees as central hubs of biodiversity. Every week, we'll dive into the fascinating world of the organisms that live on, with, and under trees. Today, we're kicking things off in a special way by introducing the concept of conservation arboriculture and its pioneer, Neville Fay, from Treework Environmental Practice. We'll explore the principles behind this approach and discuss how it has influenced arboriculture, particularly the care and management of ancient and veteran trees worldwide.
Have you ever just looked up at one of those massive old trees, those ancient oaks, and wondered, what if it could talk? What would it tell us?
I know exactly what you mean. There's a presence to them, isn't there?
Totally. Well, today we're diving into the world of those ancient trees, learning how to really care for them. We've got a ton of research on conservation arboriculture to go through.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, and a lot of it focuses on the work of this UK expert, Neville Fay.
Okay, so I'm familiar with some of his stuff. He's got that YouTube interview, right? And then some really interesting academic papers.
Exactly. Those are the ones. And what's so cool is he goes beyond just, appreciating how old these trees are.
Right.
He wants us to really grasp that these trees, especially the ancient and veteran trees, they're like entire ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, they're supporting this whole hidden world of life that most people just completely miss.
Like walking through a forest and not even realizing you're in the middle of this bustling city, but for, insects, fungi, all that.
It's amazing.
And one of the things that really struck me was his term veteran trees. It's not just about age. It's about those marks of time. The hollows, the decaying wood.
Yeah, the stuff that maybe we don't always think of as beautiful, but is actually really important.
Exactly. And Fay's like, no, those aren't signs of a tree in decline. Those are signs of a thriving ecosystem.
It's such an important shift in thinking.
Totally.
Because, we've gotten so used to this idea in arboriculture of keeping things safe and tidy.
Right, like it's someone's perfectly manicured yard.
Exactly. And Fay's point is that often misses the mark, especially when it comes to ancient trees. He even talks about how back in the day they used to fill cavities with concrete.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine? He calls it arboricultural archaeology. It's like trying to preserve a crumbling castle by filling it with concrete. Yeah, it might look stable, but you're completely disrupting the natural processes.
So instead of seeing dead wood, like a dead branch, as a problem, as something to remove, he wants us to see it as this essential thing.
Totally essential.
For all this biodiversity.
Absolutely. And that's where his research on endophytic fungi is so fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Those are those tiny fungi that live inside the tree itself.
Exactly. They're like these microscopic tenants that are usually just dormant.
Okay.
Kept in check by the tree's natural water flow. But what Fay's work shows is that when we mess with that balance, through things like improper pruning, we risk waking up those fungi, and that can actually harm the tree.
So even with good intentions, we could really mess things up.
Absolutely. It's like introducing a new species to control a pest, only to find out it throws the whole ecosystem out of whack. And that's why Fay keeps stressing this idea of tree time versus human time.
Oh, I like that. Because we think in decades, and they think in what? Centuries, millennia.
Exactly. And he has this great example. It's the Arthur Clough oak. There are, get this, over a century's worth of photographs of this tree.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right. And they show how unpredictable its growth was, how it responded to everything around it. And it just proves how much we still don't get about a tree's behavior over time.
It's wild to think 100 years of observation and we're still surprised. It makes you realize that even our smallest interventions can have huge ripple effects.
Absolutely. And those effects play out over decades, even centuries, in the life of a tree.
So wait, are we saying that keeping things tidy is actually bad for these trees? Like all that raking and sweeping, we think we're being good, but...
Well, it's not that simple, but Fay does make a really interesting point about our modern desire for a controlled landscape. He says it can actually be a problem for these ancient giants.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he uses this really cool historical perspective. He talks about pollarding. Remember hearing about that?
Vaguely. Yeah. Remind me.
So it was this practice, super common in Europe, where they'd heavily prune trees, almost every branch.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen pictures. They end up looking kind of I don't know, severe.
Exactly. And Fay says that over time, people started to see that as unsightly or even damaging to the trees.
Because it didn't fit our idea of this perfect, like, symmetrical tree.
Exactly. We started valuing, like, our aesthetic preferences, what WE thought looked good, over the actual ecological roles that those imperfections played.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Right. And Fay, he points out that these practices like pollarding, yeah, they were often about human needs, for wood or to shape the landscape, but they also created all these little openings, these wounds and hollows that actually helped foster biodiversity.
So something we thought was harmful was actually good,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. It's all about perspective, right? It's a good reminder not to assume we always know best. And this is where Fay brings in the soil.
Oh, the soil. What's he saying? Don't rake the leaves.
Well, kind of, yeah. He actually calls the soil, and I love this, the basis for practice.
Oh, I like that. It likes the base.
Yeah.
We often forget about what's going on underground, don't we?
Right. Out of sight, out of mind. But Fay really stresses how soil health is absolutely key to a tree's well-being. He talks about soil porosity, how much air and water can get through.
Makes sense.
And then the problems with compaction, from foot traffic, machinery, all that. And of course, the microorganisms, the bacteria, the fungi, all that stuff that's invisible to us, but is doing so much work down there.
Yeah. It really is a whole hidden world under our feet. It's kind of humbling when you think about it. This massive tree reaching up to the sky, and it's all supported by, I don't know, a teaspoon of healthy soil.
Right. And Fay's point is that this underground world is under threat. He talks about the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. They put out this report, it's actually pretty alarming, about how much of the world's soil is degraded. And obviously that directly affects the long-term health of our trees.
That's a bummer. So what are we supposed to do?
Well, Fay's not all doom and gloom. He reminds us that we can learn a lot from the past. He talks about this idea of vernacular arboriculture.
Vernacular.
Ugh.
Okay. Gonna need a definition on that one.
Basically, it's about looking at those traditional practices, things people have done for generations to care for trees, not because it's trendy or anything, but because it works.
Right. Those time-tested methods.
Yeah.
So we should be looking back to go forward.
That's the idea. It's less about constantly trying to invent some new technique and more about, rediscovering the wisdom that's already out there.
And I'm guessing that means a shift in how we think, too.
Totally. Instead of trying to control everything, it's more about collaborating with nature.
So less pruning shears, more listening.
Exactly. It's about learning to read the trees, understand their individual needs, work with those natural processes of decay and regeneration instead of always fighting against them.
That's powerful. Instead of seeing those gnarled branches as something that needs to be fixed, we embrace them as part of the tree's story.
Exactly. And that's really the core of what Fay is getting at, seeing these ancient trees not as, just individuals, but as vital parts of this much bigger interconnected web of life, a web that deserves our respect.
It's definitely a different way of thinking. We're so used to this, problem-solution mentality. See a problem, fix a problem. But with these trees, it sounds like it's more about, I don't know, observation, understanding, patience.
100%. And it's not just about how we view trees either. It's about how we understand our place in nature. Fay talks about this a lot, how our actions have these ripple effects.
Okay, ripple effects, how so?
Choices we make here in our own backyards even, they can impact ecosystems on the other side of the world.
Wow, okay, that's kind of a lot to take in. It can feel kind of overwhelming, to be honest, how much power we actually have. It really makes you realize that caring for these ancient trees is a huge responsibility. We're not just talking about trimming a few branches, but potentially impacting entire ecosystems for generations to come.
It's true. What Fay really drives home is appreciating them isn't enough. We have to actively protect them, and that means really understanding what they need, not just the basics, but all the stuff we've been talking about, the soil, the fungi, the timescales.
Right. It's a whole different way of thinking about trees. So what does that mean, practically? Are we going to have to send all the arborists back to school?
Well, maybe not back to school, but Fay definitely thinks we need a new generation of arborists, people who are trained in these principles of conservation.
So not just someone who knows how to use a chainsaw.
Exactly. It's about understanding the bigger picture. They have to know about biodiversity, ecology, history even.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking arborists who are also historians, ecologists, almost like tree whisperers.
Something like that. But Fay really believes that if we can bridge that gap between, the traditional knowledge and modern science, we can make sure these trees survive.
It's amazing to think these ancient trees have survived for centuries, some of them millennia, and now it's on us to make sure they have a future.
It's a big responsibility, but it's also, I think, a huge privilege to be part of that effort.
Totally. It makes you realize that just stepping outside and seeing a tree is not just about the beauty of it. It's about recognizing its history, its role in the ecosystem.
It's like each one of those trees has these stories to tell. We just have to be willing to listen.
Well, on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with that thought. Next time you see one of those ancient trees, take a moment to really see it, appreciate its story, and think about what we can do to ensure those stories continue for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us on Talking Trees. We hope you enjoyed today's exploration of conservation arboriculture and the incredible contributions of Neville Fay. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about tree care. We'll be back tomorrow with more engaging content, so stay tuned. As always, thank you for your support, and remember to keep caring for those ancient and veteran trees.